These cars didn't disappear because they were slow. They didn't disappear because they were cheap. They disappeared because almost nobody saved them. In the 1960s, these American coupes ruled the roads. Today, they've become ghosts. If you love lost cars, forgotten legends, and machines history erased, subscribe, hit like, and turn on notifications. Because once these cars are gone, they're gone forever.
The 1963 Buick Riviera didn't arrive with noise. It didn't need to. At a time when American cars were competing for attention with chrome, fins, and excess, the Riviera chose silence, not emptiness, restraint. And restraint in the early 1960s was rare. Detroit was still addicted to size and spectacle. Cars were getting longer, wider, heavier, and louder in every possible way. Designers believed that more was always better. More trim, more shine, more drama. The Riviera quietly disagreed. From the moment it appeared, it looked different. Not futuristic, not retro, just deliberate. The body was wide and low, with clean horizontal lines that made the car feel planted, almost architectural. There were no tail fins reaching for the sky, no unnecessary curves trying to impress the eye. Everything felt intentional, as if nothing could be removed without breaking the design. This wasn't a car trying to sell excitement, it was selling confidence. Buick didn't position the Riviera as a muscle car, and it never tried to compete with sports coupes. Under the hood was a large V8, but power wasn't the headline. The engine was tuned for smoothness, not aggression. It delivered quiet strength, the kind you feel without needing to talk about it. This was a car made for distance. Long highways, late nights, endless stretches of asphalt where speed mattered less than composure. Inside, the Riviera continued the same philosophy. The cabin wasn't flashy, it didn't overwhelm the driver with ornamentation. Instead, it felt controlled and calm. The dashboard was low and wide, reinforcing the sense of space. Gauges were clear, readable, and honest. Nothing was pretending to be more than it was. In many ways, the Riviera felt closer to a European Grand Tour than a traditional American coupe. It wasn't trying to dominate the road, it was designed to belong on it. And that was part of the problem. The Riviera wasn't cheap. It was priced above what many buyers expected from a Buick. And it didn't follow the visual language Americans were used to. For some, it felt too serious, too understated, too mature. It wasn't a car for everyone, and it never tried to be. Because of that, sales were modest, not disastrous, not embarrassing, just limited. Enough to make the Riviera respected, but not enough to make it common. Time, however, would do what the market didn't. As the years passed, cars like the Riviera became increasingly rare. Not because they were poorly built, quite the opposite. They were built well enough to last, but not popular enough to be preserved in large numbers. Many were driven hard, used as intended, and eventually worn down by time. Others were simply forgotten. Today, an original 1963 Riviera feels almost unreal when you see one in person. The proportions still work, the design still feels balanced. Nothing about it screams old, yet nothing tries to look modern. It exists in its own space. The Riviera didn't disappear because it failed. It disappeared because it didn't follow fashion. It was a car designed with long vision in a market obsessed with the next year's model, and history tends to be kinder to those kinds of machines. The 1963 Buick Riviera isn't remembered for being the fastest, or the loudest, or the most extreme. It's remembered because it didn't need to be. And that's why, today, it feels less like a classic car and more like a quiet ghost from a time when design still trusted restraint. Pontiac Grand Prix 1962 didn't start as a statement. It started as an idea. In the early 1960s, Pontiac was in a strange position. The brand had performance, it had image, it had youth on its side, but it didn't yet have something just as important: identity at the top of the lineup. There was power and there was style, but there was no clear answer to the question of refinement. The Grand Prix was Pontiac's answer. It wasn't meant to be a muscle car, even though it had the engine for it, and it wasn't meant to be a luxury car, even though it borrowed heavily from that world. It was something in between, a personal coupe built for drivers who wanted strength without noise and status without excess. At first glance, the car didn't beg for attention. It was long and low, with a formal roofline and restrained detailing. The proportions mattered more than decoration. Chrome was present but controlled. The body lines were clean, confident, and deliberate. This wasn't a car trying to look fast. It was a car that looked settled. Under the hood sat a large V8, available in multiple configurations. Pontiac didn't hide its performance roots, but it didn't exaggerate them either. The Grand Prix wasn't about quarter-mile times or street dominance. It was about effortless motion, the feeling that the car was always operating below its limits. You didn't push it, you guided it. On the highway, the Grand Prix made sense. It was quiet at speed, stable, heavy in a way that felt reassuring rather than clumsy. This was a car designed for long-distance driving, for hours behind the wheel where comfort and composure mattered more than raw excitement. Inside, the Grand Prix revealed what Pontiac was really trying to do. The cabin was different from anything else in the lineup. Bucket seats came standard, unusual for a large American coupe at the time. The center console ran long and wide, creating a cockpit-like feel that separated the driver from the passenger. The dashboard wrapped gently around the driver, focusing attention forward. This wasn't accidental. Pontiac wanted the driver to feel involved, not isolated. The Grand Prix wasn't a rolling living room. It was a personal space, controlled, intentional, and slightly serious. And that seriousness confused people.
The Grand Prix cost more than most Pontiacs. It didn't scream performance like the GTO would later. It didn't offer the plush isolation of a Cadillac. It occupied a narrow space in the market, one that required the buyer to understand what it was trying to be. Many didn't. Sales were respectable, but never overwhelming. The Grand Prix was admired more than it was purchased. It earned quiet respect, not mass appeal. And in a market driven by volume, quiet respect was rarely enough. As the decade moved forward, the automotive world changed quickly. Performance escalated. Styling became more aggressive. The lines between muscle, luxury, and personal coupes blurred. The Grand Prix would evolve, adapt, and eventually transform into something very different from its original vision. But the 1962 model remained distinct. It represented a moment when Pontiac aimed higher than its reputation, but refused to abandon its character. It was ambitious without being desperate, confident without being loud. Time, however, is not gentle to cars that live between categories. Many early Grand Prix coupes were driven hard and used fully. They weren't treated as collectibles. They were daily transportation for people who valued capability and comfort. When they aged, they were replaced, not preserved. Rust, neglect, and changing tastes did the rest. Today, finding a clean 1962 Pontiac Grand Prix is difficult, not because it was rare when new, but because few people thought it would ever be rare. It existed in that dangerous middle ground, respected but overlooked. When you see one now, it feels heavier than its metal. There's a presence to it, a sense that this car was part of a transition, a bridge between eras. It carries the confidence of early 1960s America, before excess fully took over, before performance became spectacle. The 1962 Pontiac Grand Prix didn't vanish overnight. It faded slowly. Not because it failed, but because it asked more of its buyer than most were willing to give. And that's why today it feels less like a classic you stumble upon and more like a quiet reminder of a time when American cars were still searching for balance.
The 1966 Oldsmobile Toronado was never meant to be easy to understand. From the moment it appeared, it challenged almost every rule American cars were built around in the mid-1960s. At a time when size meant rear-wheel drive and power meant simplicity, Oldsmobile made a radical decision. They took a full-size American coupe, gave it a massive V8, and sent all that power to the front wheels. No other American manufacturer was doing anything like this at the time. The Tornado wasn't small, it wasn't light, and it wasn't subtle. Yet beneath its long hood and sharp, formal lines was one of the most unconventional drivetrains Detroit had ever produced. Oldsmobile engineers developed a complex front-wheel drive system designed to handle torque levels many believed were impossible to manage. Critics doubted it would work. Some expected wheel hop, instability, or outright failure. Instead, the system proved surprisingly capable. The Tornado delivered smooth, controlled acceleration and impressive highway stability, especially in poor weather. Stylistically, the car stood apart as well. The hidden headlights, clean body sides, and long, uninterrupted lines gave it a presence that felt both modern and slightly intimidating. It looked like a luxury coupe, but one with a serious edge. Inside, the Tornado leaned toward comfort and isolation. The cabin was wide and spacious, designed for long-distance travel rather than spirited driving. This was not a sports car, and Oldsmobile never pretended it was. It was a high-speed grand tourer built for American roads. The problem was perception. Buyers didn't know what to make of it. Front-wheel drive was associated with small economy cars, not large V8-powered coupes. Many customers simply didn't trust the technology. Others found the car too different, too heavy, or too expensive to justify the risk. Sales were respectable but cautious. The Tornado earned awards and praise from the press, yet never became a mainstream success. It existed in an uncomfortable space between innovation and tradition, admired more than it was embraced. Over time, the Tornado's complexity worked against it. Repairs were costly, parts became specialized. As the years passed, many examples were driven hard and eventually discarded rather than preserved. Few people saw it as a future classic. Today, the 1966 Tornado feels like a quiet warning from the past. Innovation doesn't always fail because it's flawed. Sometimes it fails because the world isn't ready. The Tornado didn't disappear because it was wrong. It disappeared because it asked buyers to accept something unfamiliar. And in 1966, unfamiliar was often unacceptable. The 1965 Mercury Marauder was never meant to shout. It didn't rely on stripes, slogans, or exaggerated aggression. Its presence was quieter, and because of that, easier to miss. In the mid-1960s, Mercury sat in a difficult place inside the American automotive world. It wasn't as luxurious as Lincoln, and it wasn't as youthful or rebellious as Pontiac. The brand needed something that could project strength and confidence without abandoning restraint. The Marauder was that attempt. At first glance, it looked formal. Long hood, long doors, a low roofline, and clean body surfaces. There were no wild curves or flashy details. Everything about the car suggested weight, composure, and control. This was a car designed to feel settled at speed, not dramatic at a stoplight. Under the hood, the Marauder offered serious V8 power, not in a reckless way, but in a measured one. The engine delivered smooth, effortless acceleration, the kind that didn't demand attention but commanded respect. This was not a car meant to be driven hard in short bursts. It was built for sustained speed and long distances. On the highway, the Marauder made sense. At speed, it felt planted and stable. The car didn't float or wander. It moved with the confidence of mass and momentum, designed to cover miles quietly rather than impress spectators. Inside, the philosophy stayed consistent. The cabin was wide and deliberate. Materials were solid, the layout conservative. Nothing felt experimental. Nothing felt rushed. This was a car meant for drivers who valued calm over excitement, presence over performance theater. And that was exactly where the problem began. The Marauder arrived during a cultural shift. Performance was becoming louder. Muscle cars were starting to define the conversation. Buyers wanted drama, visual and mechanical. The Marauder refused to participate in that arms race. It wasn't flashy enough to compete with emerging muscle icons. It wasn't luxurious enough to replace a Lincoln. And it wasn't cheap enough to be an impulse buy. It existed in a narrow space, one that required maturity to appreciate. Sales reflected that reality. The Marauder wasn't a failure, but it was never a hit. It earned quiet admiration, not widespread desire. Many buyers simply didn't know what to make of it. It looked serious in an era that increasingly rewarded spectacle. As the years passed, most Marauders lived normal lives. They were driven, used, and eventually replaced. Few owners saw them as special enough to preserve. They weren't rare when new, so no one expected them to become rare later. Rust, neglect, and indifference slowly erased them from the roads. Today, a 1965 Mercury Marauder feels heavier than its size suggests. There's a seriousness to it, a sense that it belongs to a moment when American cars were still searching for identity between comfort, performance, and restraint. The Marauder didn't disappear because it lacked power. It disappeared because it lacked noise. It was a car built for people who didn't need to prove anything. And history doesn't always remember cars like that. But when one appears today, intact and original, it feels less like a survivor and more like a reminder of an era when confidence didn't need an audience. The 1960 Chrysler 300F arrived at a time when American cars were beginning to chase performance, but few dared to combine it with elegance. The 300 series had already earned a reputation for power, speed, and exclusivity, but the F took it a step further. It wasn't about flashy muscle, it was about refinement and capability in a form that few could match. From the outside, the 300F looked commanding. The long hood stretched forward with purpose, the grille was wide and confident, and the chrome trim accentuated rather than distracted. This was a car that demanded attention without trying too hard. Its lines were sharp but elegant, proportions carefully measured, a subtle mixture of aggression and dignity. Under the hood, the 300F was formidable, a massive V8 producing more horsepower than most drivers would ever need, paired with an automatic transmission designed for smooth delivery. Unlike the growing muscle car trend, this car didn't shout acceleration. It offered it quietly, effortlessly, almost as if speed itself was a courtesy rather than a spectacle. Driving a 300F was a lesson in controlled power. You didn't push it recklessly, you guided it, you respected it. Inside, the car reflected the same philosophy: leather and metal, wide seats, thoughtful ergonomics. The dashboard was functional, clean, and uncluttered, emphasizing the driver's experience without theatrics. This wasn't a car that screamed opulence. It hinted at it. It suggested wealth without boasting, capability without arrogance. Every detail felt deliberate. Yet, the 300F was not a car for everyone. Its price kept it out of reach for most buyers. Its size and weight required respect on the road, and its combination of performance and refinement was subtle enough that casual observers could overlook it entirely. In a market increasingly dominated by flash and trend, the 300F demanded understanding. It asked its driver to recognize balance, precision, and quiet confidence. As the years passed, many of these cars were used, loved, and eventually retired. Some survived by chance, some by intent. They weren't produced in enormous numbers. They were exclusive, and their presence on the road grew rarer with each decade. Today, finding a 1960 Chrysler 300F in good condition is not just about luck, it's about respect for a car that was ahead of its time. The 300F didn't vanish because it was flawed. It vanished because the world was not ready for a car that combined power with poise, speed with composure, and luxury with subtlety. It demanded a level of appreciation that few were willing to give. When one appears today, it feels monumental. Its weight, its lines, its very presence speak of a moment in American automotive history when confidence didn't need to shout. The 1960 Chrysler 300F is more than a car. It is a statement, quietly reminding us that mastery and restraint often leave the deepest impressions.